Welcome back to another episode of When Destiny Calls. My name is Dr. Lahab Al-Samarrai, and with me today, as always, Christy Foster. Christy, how are you doing today?
Hello, Dr. Lahab. Doing great today. Have a lot of sunshine here today, as you can see through my window.
I do see that.
Yeah, I enjoy
Well,
the sun. Spring is coming.
spring is coming. Spring is in the air, so we're very excited about spring coming. And the course is on Saturdays, and the course has been great. We have Lance Allred with us, and we are taking a tour of the world of archetypes. So it's a world tour. We're going to start in one place and end in the same place in the world tour of archetypes. So join us. Send us some ideas, send us some thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, without further ado, Christy wanted to talk about something today. Christy, you want to introduce our topic for today?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So today I thought we could talk about a theme I've seen the last 2 weeks with clients that I've been seeing, and that is the relationship with anger, or the understanding of what anger is, what rage is, how does that show up, what are the different ways that we could communicate better when we are angry, and if we're not if we have anger and we don't express anger, how that also shows up, because either way it still exists. And I think we live in a world, sometimes the love and light world is a little bit too much, in that people will feel guilty if they're angry because of so much social media around the perfection of how I think it appears that people are, when really we're still human, regardless if we're on social media or not. There's a false sense of I think it's a false sense of what is real, and people tend to get confused about and or feeling guilty for being angry.
Yeah, I think because anger is a complicated emotion. It stirs up some wild feelings. And so if we don't know how to modulate or regulate anger, it's a problem. And that's why it becomes something that's out of control. You could be angry with somebody and just say, I am really upset with you and you've hurt me. And it's not okay that you do this. You could say as calmly as screaming through the loudspeaker. But anger can be expressed in many different ways. I think what Christy is pointing out is that in society in general, anger is always confused and intertwined with losing control.
Yeah. And I think that comes back to through the lens of childhood and what anger looked like growing up, whether that be out of control or even passive aggressive anger. And so I would like to talk about a healthier way to express it and why it's important to express it.
Ooh. So do you want to start with an outline of different ways of expressing our emotional state, anger?
Yeah, I think that would be a good place to start.
Okay. So why don't we use an example of somebody that is having this issue and having an issue of how do I express my anger? How do I express my anger or dismay with my partner? Just create a fictional character. So we have two partners and one of them is angry with the other, but she is kind of despondent because she doesn't know how to express her anger without it sounding like she's being nagging or being honest with her emotions. That's what we're trying to help her do, and not come off as nagging or whining about something. This is more about, this is a problem that I have. So how would she approach that, Christy?
Well, that sounds so simplistic, and sometimes it is, and it isn't, in that I would say if that's an issue for someone, that I would approach it by being very clear first about what you're angry about. And that doesn't include the past. It includes this present moment. What is that one thing you're angry about? So it doesn't turn into a great big ball of fire.
So no 10 years ago, no 5 years ago, no your mother said to me, no your dad said to me, no your family did. Okay. That's always a good start.
It's always, and it's very important to, I think it's because we're speaking of women.
Yes.
I'm coming from that perspective.
Yes, absolutely.
Clarity in that sometimes can be very challenging. So that's why I tell you to write it down. And sometimes I will have people just read it because it's so difficult to express it. And so even just the sentence of, I feel angry about blank. And I will also have people ask their partner, I need to talk to you about something. Do you have a few minutes that we can talk? To create the space as well, versus just jumping in and not being aware of the space and time of what you're trying to communicate, because it is a skill set, I think. And the more that you can help yourself feel safe in that. And I think if they're your partner in general, they're actually going to say, okay, let's have a conversation. In most healthy partnerships. Yes, I should say that as well. But to just be clear, say it out loud, say the one thing you're upset about, and then the conversation happens. And yeah, that does sound easier than it probably is for a lot of people.
Well, I think part of it is under hearing yourself, right? So I think this is a really good start. I think you hit a really important point. So the first thing to do is to write it down and then hear yourself read it, and read it out loud to yourself. Don't read it internally. You want to hear your voice when you're saying it, when you're reading it out loud. You want to hear your voice saying those things and see what kind of impression it leaves on your ears. So you can tweak it, you could change it, you can also regulate the tone in which you read it or say it to the person that's in front of you. Stay within the boundaries of the recent action. Stay away from piling on other interactions to prove your point. There's no need to prove your point. You just want to get your point across, which is, I'm angry and you hurt my feelings, and this is why you hurt my feelings, and I would like you to take care of that. Or I would like you just to listen to me. Or I would like you just to hear me out. Or I just have to say it.
Yeah.
Pissed me off. So there's different reasons why we say it. I don't think that always we're searching for somebody to say, oh, I'm sorry. Sometimes we're just searching that we are able to say the things that we need to say to other people, even though they apologize for it.
It's healthy, just the expression alone. So when I have clients and I recognize I'm looking at the body, the anger will sit off a lot of times in the jaw with the clenching.
Mm,
holding back their words. And so even just having a conversation with someone outside of the relationship to, like you're saying,
mm.
hear yourself say, I'm angry.
Yeah.
That sentence alone, for some people, they never say, because there's so much guilt around feeling anger because it's bad.
Yeah, you don't have to clear your throat anymore. Your throat is cleared to say whatever you want to say. There, there's no time to reflect on what you want to say. You've already reflected on it enough.
Yeah.
You're ready to state it. And it's
So
important.
yeah. It's important for it to be witnessed by you, I think, especially.
Yeah.
Because I think that's more important even than the other person to a degree, because you're getting comfortable with your own self
Yeah.
and your own emotions, and you don't need their buy-in of whether you're angry or not.
I think that's very well said. You don't need other people's buy-in that you're angry. It's okay
Yeah.
for you to be angry. It's the expression of anger that trips us up most of the time. So this is like part 2 of the conversation, which is how do we express it without, like, because if we hold it too long and we don't say anything, that will cause it to burst out.
It does, and it bursts out usually in behavior.
And it's very destructive to the relationship.
Yeah.
Because then it's like, oh, you know, I've been holding this and I want to punish you for it now.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes, it becomes destructive. It starts to undermine the relationship that you're building with this human being. Because it's like, oh, I can't trust them. They're always carrying something. I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop always. Because they
Yeah. And I think for women too, what I've noticed is the tendency for the assumption that you should know why I'm angry.
Mm.
There's another piece of that.
Well, women assume that men are emotionally intelligent. That they're not. They're not. Their emotional intelligence is limited because for many reasons. One of them is it's not natural to them. And then the other thing is that society doesn't teach it.
No, they don't.
And it's an important tool for kids to have. Emotional intelligence is one of the most important things because this is where you get all the traumatic incidents in your life. This is when people say things and we don't know how to interpret it. And therefore we take it as something that is negative. And a lot of little boys grow up feeling scared or hurt, and the legitimate way they have learned or been taught to react is through violence, either against oneself or against others, and that somehow that's okay. That's a okay way of behaving, and so now you have a lack of emotional intelligence because it's like I could only go into 2 states. One is I am out of control, and the other is I am disassociated from it. There's no in between state. There's no other way that I could interpret it. And so go on with that they assume that the other party knows.
Well, I'm speaking from my experience with people, and I think also my own personal experience in my growing up years. Anger for a woman was not something that was accepted. That was part of the culture. It's not good or bad. That's just the way it was. And so it took me a long time to be able to have a relationship with it to where I could say I'm angry about blank without feeling guilty. But it is such a skill set. It's a practice. I think conceptually we can understand it, and yet overall what I see in my practice is the understanding of it, but not really taking action and saying the words and practicing what it feels like to express yourself.
Yeah.
Because it really is a practice.
Yeah. Well,
And
it's hard to talk about. It's hard talking about yourself being upset, because when you were growing up, they didn't allow you to talk about being upset. So
no,
when you were angry, it was denied you. So this is also about emotional intelligence. It's like when you're a child, you are emotionally intelligent. You express your emotion. The problem with the lack of emotional intelligence is that the people who are teaching you how to regulate it are actually teaching you how to stifle it. They're not actually teaching you how to regulate it. They're telling you how to swallow it, shove it down, or shut up. That's not your place in the world. So I think with your community, or where you were raised in, you didn't have that power. So that became a part of the issue. So anger meant that power, that you had power. If you are able to express anger, that means you have power. And so anger and power kind of came into a symbiotic relationship, even though they're actually quite separate. Anger is a natural emotion. It occurs. It's like happiness. It's like sadness. It's like other emotions. But I think what Christy's underlining issue is that this issue is a very large issue in society, because we have told people it's not okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I think anger and rage, we're talking about two different things, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
You're talking about, you're naming anger, we can name sadness, joy. Those are, when I'm talking about anger as just an emotion, I like to express that as it creates a movement.
Yeah.
Because something shifts with anger. It is like a fire energy.
Absolutely.
And rage is very different, because rage is more destructive and reactive. They're not the same.
Yes. So anger, when it is repressed, when it's held back, when it's told over and over again that it's not okay, it's not okay, it's not okay, it's not okay. So whatever lit a fire was there that felt like the anger, now you have a raging inferno that ends up being rage, because over and over again, I've been told over and over again not to speak my anger, not to speak my mind, not to speak up for myself, not to speak up when I'm hurt, not to speak up when somebody's done me wrong, not to speak up, because I don't have the right to speak up. I think this is what we're getting at. The right to speak up. You have the right to speak up. So then you have a right to voice anger. You don't have to wait for the outburst. So anger could lead to an outburst because you're trying to store it, or it could change into an inferno because you've stored it too long. So it depends on how long you leave it in the oven. So if you're holding on to it a short period of time, I think Christy's number one thing is write it down, talk about it, and state it, so you get that energetic movement.
Yeah, because otherwise, how it shows up, just for some reference, is certainly in clenching of the jaw, heartburn. I would also say pretty severe constipation and hemorrhoids are also part of it, because that part of the body holds the energy of not being able to move it and let go. And so what I would tell you is start doing some of your own asking questions. When I get angry, where do I feel it? Because everyone has a different space in the body that we feel an emotion. And sometimes there's some classic ones, which would be heartburn for anger, or the jaw. but to start asking yourself and connect some of those dots. Where do I feel it? And what is my relationship with it? What do I think about anger? What do I feel about it? And I would suggest writing down those answers, because otherwise you're just going to keep looping in your head the same story of your experience. And to bring light to something that might have a lot of judgment around it is the only way to bring light to your body as well, to get it to move and feel less dense and less pain.
Absolutely. I think this is what you're talking about, is bringing the consciousness in, right? And the more we're able to express ourself and our power, the more we're able to express our ideas, the more our ideas expand and make us feel that we belong. The problem is when you are unable to express a part of yourself, you are continually living in a sense that you don't belong, that you are not part of the group, that certain people have certain rights and you have none of those because you can't express a simple emotion, or you're afraid of this simple emotion, or you were never taught to express this simple emotion. Right?
And I would say it's important too. Some people growing up and or in relationship to have their partners say, well, you shouldn't feel that way, because that is a very common thing for parents to say to children. And then that's negating and denying the feeling state of the child. Yeah.
Anytime you say to a child, you should not feel this way, you are telling them they are feeling something in a way that's wrong, that they actually are acting in a way that's strange. And so these normal states that you're talking about become perverted states, because I've been told all my life, I shouldn't do that. That's wrong. I shouldn't think that way. But I don't know what that means. Does that mean I'm wrong? So they start think that there's a dysfunction within themselves, that they're just wrong, because the upbringing or the child rearing or whatever you want to call it is not working. It's working in a way that's detrimental to the child. And we see this all the time with little kids. The schools don't teach them how to be emotionally intelligent also. They tell them to do things against what they feel intuitively. It's like, we don't have hugs. Well, okay, so you're teaching the child that they can't express emotion. That's the first thing you're doing. Well, that's a problem, because now you've traumatized that child, because you're telling them that the piece of them that gave them that energetic movement, that happiness, is inappropriate. And it's only appropriate in certain places. Now, my feeling state is not regulated because I don't know when it's okay. Like, can I act this way over here? Can I act this way? And that's when you have children who actually act out. It's not because they haven't been taught how to act. It's because they've been taught how to act. It's because people are trying to teach them how to be as a being instead of letting them be the being.
That's very true. And it pulls right into adulthood.
Yeah. And so we're talking about young girls, and young girls who are taught that their bodies are a sin. They can't speak anger. They have to hide themselves. They have to be submissive, or they have to be, is detrimental to this child's growth. It stunts the child. The child grows up in a way that there's always self-blame and self-hate. And so, of course, emotion becomes a primary issue. It's like, what is acceptable? How do I say this? How can I say this? I get asked that question in practice all the time. How do I do that though? What do I say?
Right.
And I say what you're feeling. Tell them what you're feeling. Say exactly what it is. There's no magic trick to it. Tell them exactly the way it is. Just trust that you could tell them the story. That's it. Trust yourself and trust in your own story. Because I think that's a really hard part for kids who grew up being told they're wrong. Trust yourself and trust your story. Trust your instincts. Because kids who grow up in those circumstances, or young girls who grow up in those circumstances, don't trust themselves.
No, there's no reference point for that.
Yes.
And I think generally speaking, what happens too is then that you're always looking for outside validation in any way, shape, or form about how you're feeling, and is that okay? And
yeah.
I guess when you're looking it up for other people's validation, it creates even more confusion within your system and more sickness in your body.
Well, yes, because you're looking for validation. It's hard to find it because you don't know what you're looking for. Because your sense of reality has been distorted. And it's been distorted by the closest people to you. And that's why it's always distorted on the external. It's always like, I'm not really sure. I don't know what they mean. I don't know what they want. I don't know how to feel. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. And it comes into these waves of feelings of inadequacy.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And so what you have is like somebody who's always sitting and the chair beneath them is always trembling. It's almost like it's going to collapse and they're going to hit the floor. So they can't trust what they're sitting on.
Yeah, and I think it's a messy process. And as you allow yourself to feel those different emotions, I would tell you to also give room for it not to come out perfectly and it not to sound a certain way, because you're practicing in the mirror, practicing with the therapist, practicing with a friend about really getting used to saying how you're feeling. And I think anger is one of the most challenging ones that I see because of all the different aspects associated with it.
Which, go ahead. Sorry, Christy.
Well, I'm wondering, Dr. Lahab, if you have some ideas about ways to practice, like we talked about saying it out loud. Does anything else come to your mind about how someone might be able to move into that a little easier?
Well, the part of it is feeling comfort within oneself. And we talked about this, I think, last week or the week before, our episode on the shadow and the origins of the shadow. This is where you trust the shadow. This is where you have to get closer to your shadow. Because the energy that is contained within the shadow is where all those elements of what you were denied are hiding. And that's why they hijack you. And that's why they take you by surprise. Mm-hmm. And that's why they have very complicated ways of doing things. And that's why I'm afraid of expressing my emotion, because I'm afraid my shadow is going to come out. I'm afraid that all this stuff that I've been hiding from everybody is just going to come out, and nobody's going to like me when it comes out, because I don't like me. And that's part of the problem, right? Yeah. Part of this, the simplicity of befriending your shadow, you have to accept your shadow first. And you don't need to befriend them first, accept it. This is a part of you. So go ahead, Christy. You were going to say something.
I think it's a very healthy practice to see those parts in us that we don't like, or
Yeah.
that other people might not like. And once again, practice writing it down and saying, I accept all parts of me, because every human being has all of those parts.
Yeah.
Light and shadow. No one is exempt from that.
Mm.
Because it's our experience. And if you can remember that everyone does have that, I think it makes it a little easier to accept it.
Mm.
And I tell clients to even say it out loud. I accept both my light and my shadow.
Yeah.
Because you hear it and it becomes more natural versus hiding behind and hiding in the dark. And
you can't hide from your shadow. Your shadow exists within you, and everything that has a form, according to Jung, casts a shadow. There's always a shadow aspect. We know this from the archetypal structures. The archetype can be both giving, fulfilling, engaging, life-preserving. It could also be death, destructive, enraged, angry, distortive. It can have both energies. We know this because everything has these energies. Mm-hmm. We have these energies. Potential for anything we build has those energies. When we create something, part of it could be used for good, part of it could be used for bad. Why? Because in the creative process, we create what we know. This is part of the prototype. Everything that we create is part of what we know.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the original archetypal design, and therefore we recreate it wherever we go.
And if we understand it, I think it makes it easier to identify, to move in and out of it more easily.
The closer we are to it, the more connected we are to it, the more it moves through us, the more we're engaged in it, and where we can continue to explore, understand, and be enlightened by what we're seeing. Because now, instead of me moving against my own energy, me moving against my fear, me moving against my sadness, me moving against, I'm not fighting with myself anymore. I am moving with my energy. I am no longer moving against my energy. One of the things that happens when we don't express our anger is we end up internally in conflict, absorbed, and basically stuck. So it's like an endless war. It doesn't end. So I wake up in the morning, I'm at war. I go to bed at night, I'm at war. I wake up again, I'm at war. That's what becomes detrimental. That's why when we talk about this is so significant, is how do you express yourself? Part of it is expressing anger, but how do we express ourselves? How do we say what we want, what we need, what we desire is acceptable? It might not be what you want, what you need, what you desire, but that doesn't take away from it. Mm-hmm. Me stating my wants and needs and desires and my anger with you does not take away from who you are. This is my right. This is my part. This is my strength. This is who I am. This is my message.
And that's an integration.
Absolutely.
Of the light and shadow within us.
You have to, right? This is one thing I think we talked about with the origins of the shadow. You have to be able to bring that close to you, because the further it hides away from you, the further in darkness it is, the more dangerous you are to yourself.
Mm.
You're dangerous to yourself, and you're also dangerous to others, because now you're unpredictable. There's a side of you we don't know. And when is that going to be engaged? We don't know. Should we trust you? We don't know. You're dangerous.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. I mean, it's like, okay, if every inclination of anger I dismiss or disassociate, I am building a bomb,
Yes.
right? I am building a bomb in pieces, and it's pieces of emotional anger that I am denying my feeling state of having. I'm not going to get angry. Okay, that's a piece. I just put it there. I'm not going to get angry. Well, you know, how long are you going to do that? Because basically you're diverting large amounts of energy, charged energy, and instead of letting it go through the process, your charged energy, you're basically dismissing it, disassociating it, hiding it.
And that does become dangerous.
Yeah.
Because it has to move eventually. It has to move.
It has to. That's why it explodes. That's why it becomes, you know, and the thing that you talked about, you said, but that's called rage, Dr. Lahab. But we don't differentiate because we've not been taught to differentiate. We don't have the emotional intelligence to differentiate. We're associating that they're all one and the same. They're not. These are larger charges of energy you're talking about. So rage is 10 years of me saying yes.
Yes.
Even when I want to say no.
Yep.
That's what you're getting when I'm enraged. You're getting my 10 years of saying yes. And that's why it's so detrimental, because then you feel like then this constant dismissing of self, dismissing of who you are, it dismisses your value, right? It diminishes how you see yourself in the world. You start to become depressed. You start to withdraw. You start to decay from the internal. There's death and decay because you're not allowing yourself to move within the energy. You are made of energy. And when you try to isolate certain areas of energy, food, sex, anger, hate, when you try to box it up and sell it off as a pretty piece of Tupperware, then all hell breaks loose.
And then we hear the statements of, I don't know who that was.
Yeah.
You know what just happened?
Yeah.
And
I can't believe I said that to you. I would never say that. Of course you would. You just did.
I think it can be, I know when I was first, and I certainly practiced that, learning how to express that, it is messy. And it just, I don't know, I think organically to let it move in you and keep connecting to where do I feel it. Sometimes even asking the question, if it had a sound, what would it sound like?
Yeah.
Versus what do I think about it? To come in a different way, and or if I were to move anger, what would that movement look like?
Yes.
Because our body is so intelligent, it isn't just our minds that can move anger. There's many ways to move it. And that's one of the ways to, I think, just start practicing how you're feeling, whether that be anger or anything. Where do I feel it? And maybe asking yourself, what does it sound like? To start to get comfortable with your emotions and validate that they're there, because they are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's trial and error. It takes time.
Yeah.
But anybody can do it because you already have the tools. You're just basically, you're re-regulating yourself.
Yeah.
So what people have done to us as they've raised us is, the idea is to help us self-regulate. Unfortunately, because most of the adults in our lives as we're growing up have hard time self-regulating. We weren't really taught how to self-regulate. We were taught how to create pathology and trauma. And so when we are learning what Christy's talking about, expressing ourselves, expressing our anger, it could look messy. We're teaching ourselves to self-regulate again. Oh, I could express this. I just can't throw a can of beer with it. I can express this. I just can't throw the pan across the living area. I can express this. I just don't need to stick up my finger in their face afterwards. I could express it. So there's different ways of expressing something. So I could express it now, and people know I'm pissed, but I don't have to throw anything. So I've kind of moved from this ancient, dysregulated state to a more regulated state. And regulation is about evolution, right? The more we're able to regulate ourselves, the more we're able to do shit. We can't do it if we're not regulated. You have to be regulated. You've seen people who are dysregulated who are doing stuff for you. It doesn't come out well. They are not going to be able to make the cup of coffee. They're not going to be able to fry a burger, even though everybody should be able to fry a burger. It's not that, it's complicated. They're not going to be able to do it. Because then you have to follow ideas and thoughts and rules. And if I am internally in conflict and I'm internally in fear and I'm internally angry and I'm internally lit on fire, then I can't do anything for you. I can't do it for myself.
Yeah.
Which is the other extreme.
Yeah, but I think that's very profound in that we really can't give what we're not giving to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And despite what I think we've been told about that, if we come back to just being loving to ourselves is expression.
Absolutely.
And then we can make much more room for people in our lives to express themselves without being activated.
Yeah.
Because we're practicing what self-love is.
And self-love is not to carry anger or hate.
Right.
That's why we have to verbalize anger.
Yeah, because it makes you sick, makes you rage eventually. And I think the piece of anger that is very destructive too, that I see, is the passive aggressive anger.
Yes.
And
microaggressions.
Yeah, anger looks many different ways. So in that piece of looking at your own shadow, what is that for you?
Yeah.
What are your behaviors without judging them? But the only way we can move a behavior is to notice it and bring light to the behavior.
Yeah.
And if we are blindly acting or reacting in relationships and we don't know our patterns, or we're choosing not to know our patterns, that's when it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And looking at our shadow, our blind spot, is a very healthy way to continue to grow as a human being, to be better in relationships with your children, with your partner.
Absolutely.
It requires us to look at those difficult pieces that we might think are bad, and they're not. They're just part of being human.
Yeah. Yeah. There are a lot of dark spaces. There are a lot of dark doors. There's a lot of spaces we don't see. There are a lot of places we don't know that exist within us. We need to be able to not live in fear and not respond out of fear. And part of that is expressing our anger, understanding ourselves, because now if I'm able to express my anger to you, so you're expressing it to your friend or your mate or your partner or whatever that person is in your world. You're expressing anger. You're not expressing the end of a relationship. You're not expressing the end of the courtship or the friendship or the work. You're just telling them what is not working for you, what is provoking you, what is triggering you. Right?
I think that is a practice. It's like exercising a muscle.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. And I think it requires, this is my own personal experience, that it requires us to unplug from the outside world to really go into ourselves to see what's happening. What are we noticing without all the stimulus around us?
Yeah.
That might be helpful as you begin to look at those parts of you. Shut everything off, your phones, your computer, your TV, because all of the outside stimulus also makes your nervous system amped up a little more.
Yeah.
And if you want to know how you're feeling, that requires you to go inside and slow down and get into a space of stillness, if possible, which is possible. Sometimes I think asking people to get still creates some angst in the body as well, because they don't like to.
Mm.
That's where it's so important for you to do that, because there's something that's wanting to be seen if that angst is so great that you don't think you can.
Yeah.
And that's dangerous, to not pay attention to that, because something will break eventually.
Well, what's hard is that, when you've learned a certain way of moving in the world, when you live in this world, you learn to move in a certain way, depending on how much people have opened up the way for you to move.
Yeah.
So depending on your skin color, depending on your race, depending on your status, depending on your class, depending on several things. But so there's a movement in the world, right? And if we're disconnected from the things, for example, like anger, like fear, desire, needs, if we're moving in the world and this part of us is disconnected, we are causing all kinds of havoc to our world, to our existence, because we're moving in the world in a direction where we're being moved by forces that are internal to us. We can't see them because we have told ourselves they're not okay. And so we end up in situations where the people that we are meeting are reaffirming our stance internally, which is, I'm not okay.
Yeah.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, as the magician said. You get what you do. You do what you get.
Very true. It's a reflection back.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like if I believe this long enough and I do it, then I'm going to get it back. And so it comes back to me. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly why I believe what I believe.
Yep.
Yeah. You're creating your own feedback loop. You're creating your own disinformation campaign.
That's a good way to say it.
Yeah, you're creating your own bubble. You live in the disturbance that is you. And then when you decide that you want to leave that disturbance, that trauma, that life of disassociation, of that life of disconnection, that life of constant fear, that's when things start to get better. And one of those things is we express our anger in a productive way. Productive to whom? Not to other people, by the way. We're not saying that to like, no, productive to you. It's productive to your own energetic state. I think this is what Christy is explaining. Is like, well, you have to practice it. Yeah.
Yeah. And the more that you do for your body and your own health, I think the healthier you become, because that repressed emotion creates disease.
Yes.
Over time.
Yes.
And so it's not just an intellectual benefit to express it.
No.
It's all parts of you. Your sleep, your immune system, your health, your relationships. You'll notice it everywhere in your life, becoming lighter and better.
It liberates you. Once you are able to express yourself, it liberates you to not to make yourself uncomfortable, because before you were expressing yourself, you were making yourself uncomfortable. You were thwarting yourself. You were twisting yourself into pretzels to fit into other people's ideas and thoughts of who you should be or what you are. And so, of course, your body feels freer, less like a pretzel. Your energy is freer. Your attention to things that give you meaning and make you happy expands, because now I'm able to express my anger. I don't have to run away or hide from it and think I'm angry all the time. Because when you're not doing something, you know how it comes back, right, Christy? It keeps nagging you. It's like, you're angry, you're angry. You're like, no, I'm not angry. Leave me alone.
Yeah, because it does show up.
Yeah, you can't run away from it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do we call it? We call it a nagging voice.
Yeah.
And
it's helpful to talk about it with someone.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And just find that person that you can talk to and see what it sounds like coming out of your mouth.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, a friend is always good. Say, what do you think if I express my anger in this way? It's always good. It's always good to play with the idea. Don't trap yourself into acting or behaving in a certain way because you found a correct way to. There's no correct way. No.
It's very individual.
Yeah, it's just different variations of, how do you eventually learn how to take the edge off of it. You're not going to learn it right away. It's going to come out edgy at first, just because it's your first time. So it's, it comes out with an edge. But over time, you're able to express it without cutting everybody in your path. You're able to express it, and it's about you. And you didn't have to slap 10 people to get the point across. Just talking about you.
Yeah.
And I say that because I know that other part. But you know, it's hard. It's like you learn. It's a new activity. It's a new tool, a new technique, right?
It is a technique.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
also self-regulation.
Yeah.
You're regulating those pieces of you that can be triggered. You're saying, oh, I'm going to talk about my anger. You know, and the more you talk about what triggers you in a conscious way, the less likely you are to live under its tyranny.
Yeah. Bringing consciousness or light to it certainly takes the charge out.
Yeah. Yeah. And it gives it a new charge, a new perspective.
And so to have the practice is really about having a relationship with yourself and going into all aspects of that
Mm.
as we move forward in the world. All parts of those in us, the anger, the joy, the grief, sadness,
Mm.
they're always moving. And sometimes it's helpful for me to think of that as like dancing with those emotions. They come in, they come out. And the more that I allow them to come in, the easier it is for them to move out. Because I get comfortable with it and what it feels like and what it sounds like. It's both, and usually at the same time.
But I think that's important.
Yeah.
I think it's important that the energy moves through you quickly. I think it helps you regenerate more energy, fresher ideas, different perspective, a more optimistic perspective. It doesn't mean that the initial energy is gone. It just is transforming into something else. And part of our ability to voice, I think Christy said some really important things today. One of them is to hear yourself. That's important, to hear yourself when you're angry. Read it out to yourself. Listen to it. Think about it, reflect on it. Read it out to yourself again. Hear it again. See what it sounds like. Sometimes you need to hear it 3 times. Sometimes you don't really need hear it the first time or second time. Is it that what you wanted to say? Is that what you want to convey? Is that what you want to tell the world about yourself?
It's a good practice. I'll also have people, once they write it down, especially the first time when they're practicing it, to write it without a filter. And that is just coming, because I think when we filter it, we block it again. So just to write what you're angry about without punctuation, without worrying about if anyone's going to read it. And afterwards, you can reread it, and then I'll have people burn it. So they're not, because I will hear people say, well, I don't want anyone else to read it. I don't want people to think that I don't like them or whatever. And still do the practice of writing it down. And then if you want to burn it, you can, as you make space for allowing all of it, though. Because therein lies the problem if we don't make space for it. There's little shards that are still held in the system.
Yeah.
And those shards eventually get infected.
Yeah.
So it's just, that's one way of a practice to start getting in touch with what anger is to you and what's your relationship with it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a really important topic. I think it's a topic that's not really discussed. Enough. because this is something that needs to be at policy level. The way we look at education, the way we look at socialization, the way we look at helping people integrate their emotional feeling states. You know, it's not good enough for you to say to your child, oh, express your anger, and you're disassociating yours. What you're telling the child is it's not okay to express anger.
Yep.
That's what you're teaching them. But I let them express themselves. No, you're telling them that daddy lets you express yourself, but it's really not okay because even daddy doesn't express himself. That's not okay. That's why it's important to start talking about what are we afraid of and why should we be afraid of that? Why should we be afraid to express our anger?
And I would love to hear what people think the question to that, or the answer to that question is.
Yeah.
So if you're listening, I would love to hear what
send
your answer
send us questions, suggestions, thoughts to the Institute for Conflict, one word, @gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. With that, we're gonna wrap it up for this week. Christy, any last thoughts?
No, my only thought would be to really make room for yourself this week, and all parts of you this week. And notice when you go into judgment, if they're not what you perceive as a good emotion or a good thought, and maybe jot it down so you can become more aware of how you're feeling and what your patterns are.
Yeah. Be gentle with self.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. So we send you with that thought of be gentle to yourself, be kind to yourself. And we will return when destiny calls next week. I am Dr. Lahab Al-Samarrai, and this is Christy Foster, and we are When Destiny Calls. See you next week.